Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, May 2nd. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. We're almost through another week here, Jill, on this Friday Eve. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. As we record this right now, Jill, the Met Gala has begun with all the various wardrobe choices. But we're going to take some time to watch it, and we'll have all our takes for you on tomorrow's podcast.
The theme this year is the Garden of Time. So we'll see how the various celebs and models and whomever else gets invited to that thing, how they interpret that. I'm expecting flowers, Moshe.
Well, for all of you listening this morning, expect some pictures and some videos on the Instagram feed. I actually asked the audience last year, Jill, are you guys okay with me kind of taking a break from politics and, all the serious news to do Met Gala? And overwhelmingly, the vote was, of course. So
please,
there you go. We need a break. We need a break from it all.
Okay, well, the opposite of a break, I'm going to give you the headlines now.
Let's do it.
Some more insight into why Columbia University called in the NYPD on Tuesday to break up the protests over on the West Coast. Protests at UCLA turned violent. In Florida, the 6-week abortion ban is now law, what that means for women in the state, and also the political implications. Secretary of State Antony Blinken back in the Middle East, what he is saying about a potential hostage ceasefire deal, why one school district in Missouri is paying families to drive their own kids to school, an update on interest rates and where they may be going this year. Moshe, a little bit of trivia. Which airport says it hasn't lost a single piece of baggage in 30 years?
Jill, I found out the answer to this question. As you were, but I think some people might be surprised where in the world they do not lose your luggage.
Spoiler alert, it's not the United States. What Venice is doing to curb over-tourism, plus Justin Timberlake explains the origins of It's Gonna Be May.
And we promise, folks, this is the final item we will have on this meme this year until next May. But we thought, especially for all you millennials listening, that you would want to know this answer.
Right. It's May 2nd. We're done.
We're done.
There's a moratorium.
It's like the Larry David Happy New Year until January 3rd. We can't wish you Happy New Year. It's going to be May, only last till the morning of May 2nd. And at the end of this podcast, that's it.
That's right. So until then, we will see you in 2025. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Austin Powers and GPS on this day in history, Jill.
All right, to our top story once again, campus protests in the aftermath of the NYPD raid at Columbia and violence breaking out between protesters at UCLA. More than 400 arrests have been made at schools across the country in the last 24 hours, about 300 in New York alone, at Columbia and also City of New York or CUNY schools. We're learning a bit more about why Columbia called on the NYPD to clear out Hamilton Hall on Tuesday night, where protesters had broken through windows and doors and barricaded themselves inside. During a press conference Wednesday, the NYPD Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism said that there is a concern around radicalization in the city and that the NYPD saw professional organizers and anarchists from other protests throughout the years infiltrating campuses. Take a listen.
There are a number of different individuals who we know from over the years associated with protests, not just in our city, but in other cities as well, who are linked to and who we see doing training around the change in tactics that we described yesterday and that we all witnessed. The black bloc attire, the breaking windows, breaking doors, the vandalism, property destruction, the barricading, makeshift weapons that we recovered in the encampment.
And New York City Mayor Eric Adams, he reiterated that. He said there is a movement to radicalize young people. He said, I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it. He said, I know that there are people who say, well, the majority of the protesters may have been students, but he said, you don't have to be the majority to influence and co-opt an operation. And that's what this is about.
Yeah, this is something we noticed, Jill, as we were seeing the video come in from these campuses. Even though there are people of a variety of ages who are students, it appeared in some of these tenant campuses that they're getting training from people who hop from protest to protest, people who were involved in some of those globalization, World Trade Organization protests 25 years ago, the violent ones in Seattle or Occupy Wall Street. They sort of jump from cause to cause. Unclear, of course, who might be paying them or what's inspiring them here. Again, some of them anarchists. And so you saw some of that tactics develop, and there was a conversation happening behind closed doors between the NYPD and the university saying, listen, this could get really bad given some of the personalities that are involved here. Many of you have been asking, okay, so what's the mix here between students, outsiders? What's the structure? It depends on what campuses you're talking about. But, you can go one by one, like who has an incentive to do this? Who has an incentive to sort of divide America, create violence? These are people who are not interested in compromise, not interested in having a conversation. In some cases, just interested in creating pure chaos. At the same time, there are earnest protesters who take issue with what's going on with the war in the Middle East. And yet it's become very complex, right? Because you have earnest protesters who believe in certain things. You have certain people who are trying to co-opt the cause. And so different campuses have gone different directions here. And so you're hearing this more and more from a few different campuses. You heard this from WashU St. Louis. You heard this down in Florida, University of Florida, out in Arizona, at Arizona State, as well as University of Arizona, where in some cases when they conduct arrests, they're like, the majority of people here are not associated with campus. They're adults, and in some cases, they just kind of jump from cause to cause. So again, not to diminish the cause, but just adding to the complexity here of these various protests. It's hard to draw a clear line sometimes. So that's East Coast. As of early evening Wednesday, the West Coast situation down there in Westwood at UCLA continues to be very concerning. That's where things have devolved to such a degree that UCLA, the University of California, LA, canceled classes yesterday. That came after hours of violence overnight as there was hand-to-hand combat between pro-Israel supporters, or what appeared to be pro-Israel supporters, and the pro-Palestinian encampment on campus. The president of the UC system, the University of California system, calling for an independent review here as to what happened, what went down. There's been a very large pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel encampment at UCLA for a number of days. The school has declared it unlawful in violation of a number of university policies. There have been interactions back and forth, verbal back and forth, some physical back and forth in recent days. Videos have been released online, Jews being told they're not allowed to pass through if they say they're a Zionist, if they believe in the right of Israel to exist. And so tensions have increased over time. It led 24 hours ago to a group of counter-demonstrators, appearing to be pro-Israel demonstrators, dressing in black outfits, also wearing masks, trying to tear down barricades late Tuesday into Wednesday. Hand-to-hand combat, sticks, fireworks going off, a number of injuries there as the pro-Israel side trying to bring down the Palestinian encampment there. Pepper spray being sprayed back and forth. And notably, the LAPD effectively allowing this to go on for nearly 3 hours. They said they weren't called by the university for a while. And so just video of just from 11 p.m. to about 2 a.m. there on the campus of UCLA, just an all-out brawl happening at times. Eventually, the police are called in and clear the fighting, though the encampment still stands. The bottom line here, terrible, divisive, embarrassing for the university here, and it's not over yet. A professor of Jewish history on the campus saying this is the darkest day in 3 decades at the university, that this is a complete and total systems failure as the UC system has sort of sat back here. Jill, we should note there were protests. There were protests more than a decade ago at UC Davis, a different campus, where police actually engaged in physically taking out some protesters. That led to some policy changes where the UC system doesn't call in the cops unless they think they really need to. And it appeared that even though an all-out brawl was happening on their campus, UCLA did not do that. You had the LA chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations condemning the violence, saying it was a mob of pro-Israel extremists. You had the nonprofit Jewish Federation saying in a statement that this is all the fault of the university, but also appalled by the violence in condemning any violence done in the name of Jews or Israel. So that was what unfolded there. At the same time, the encampment continues. Continued videos showing the pro-Palestinian encampment blocking Jewish students from walking through some main areas of campus. Jill, apparently, according to social media videos, they've taken to issuing wristbands for the Palestinian encampment there. And so if you have a wristband, you may pass. If you don't have a wristband, you may not pass. So videos showing students who don't have wristbands and haven't declared that they're anti-Zionist or part of the cause not being allowed to walk through some main public areas of the campus. So just a very ugly situation there, not one that generally is leading to any sort of conversation about the conflict. As I noted on the Instagram account yesterday, Jill, it's like we have a small piece of the Middle East here now on America's college campuses that you can get for a small price of $50,000 to $90,000 a year. You too can experience portions of occupation, border controls, altercations, a whole variety of things. I kid on this, but ultimately it's a bizarro world. Sort of kind of cosplaying the Middle East on some of these college campuses, and we've been asked here, how long do we think this thing lasts? Semester's over for many students in the coming week. So we'll see how long this lasts on campus and then sort of what version of it, if we see versions of it, continue to unfold this summer.
Right. I believe that Occupy Wall Street, I think it was winter that did that one in, where it was just like it got cold and we're just like we're not into it anymore. We don't want to be intense in Zuccotti Park anymore. And I'm not trying to make light of it, but I think that there is a practical part of this also, where at a certain point kids do go home for the summer. They probably have summer jobs or summer internships. So perhaps we'll see things kind of die down at that point. We'll see if it picks back up.
And I should mention this, and this is something that got a lot of attention on our Instagram feed, a recent poll over at Harvard of 18 to 29-year-olds in the country, asking 18 to 29-year-olds, what are the most important issues for you? And they had 16 issues. Number 1, inflation. Number 2, healthcare. Number 3, housing. Number 4, gun violence. Number 5, jobs. So it turns out 18 to 29-year-olds, Gen Z, just like us, just like the rest of the generations, inflation, healthcare, housing, gun violence. Notably, as you keep on going down the list, you got education at 10, you got taxes at 13, free speech at 14. Bottom of the list, number 15, the Israel-Palestine conflict. Number 16, student debt. Lessons from all of this? 1, social media is not real life. College campuses are not real life. It's a large country. Even the way the media is prioritizing certain stories, not always real life. But I found that notable, and I think a lot of people took a lot away from that, being like, when you actually survey the larger population and not just a group of activists on campus, which only represent a certain percentage of Americans, second to last place in terms of importance was the Israel-Palestine conflict, and last place was student debt, which also is very interesting because the Biden administration has made a huge issue of that, being like, we got to win over the youth vote with student debt. And it's 16 of 16, at least according to this poll. So I'd love to see more data there, but still very interesting sort of, as I texted you, I think, less than 7,422,326, that social media is not real life.
Okay, switching gears here. In Florida, a 6-week abortion ban, before many women even know that they're pregnant, is now officially in effect. It means that clinics across the country's third largest state can no longer offer abortions to most patients who walk through their doors, forced to turn away any woman who is farther than 6 weeks along. Florida joining more than a dozen other states with either full bans or those 6-week bans. Florida's new abortion law, signed by Governor Ron DeSantis last year and confirmed by the Florida Supreme Court last month, replaces a 15-week ban that took effect soon after Roe was overturned. It will affect significantly more women than any other state ban on abortions in the first trimester. More than 80,000 women get an abortion in Florida in a typical year, accounting for about 1 in 12 abortions nationwide.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note here that a 6-week ban, many groups will say is effectively a full ban, because when you think about 6 weeks, you're dating back to your last period. And so for many women, it's like, unless you're testing every single day or looking for it, six weeks is pretty unrealistic. For every Florida woman with an unwanted pregnancy, the future will now be determined by the size of the fetus in the ultrasound. If it's small enough to measure under the 6-week limit, she she can have an abortion. If not, she'll either have to order abortion pills through the mail or travel to a clinic at least 3 states away. And given Florida's location, that either means North Carolina, Illinois, or Virginia. But at the same time, we should note that abortion rights advocates are hopeful that a ballot measure this November will lift the ban. So Floridians will, like many states, have a chance to vote on abortion this fall if the measure is approved, and they're going to need to get 60% of the vote in Florida to do this. That would then restore abortion access to 24 weeks of pregnancy. So that 60% threshold will be challenging, but so far, as we've told you on this pod, when it comes to abortion rights, so far when it's gone to voters, whether it's in Kansas, Kentucky, Ohio, Montana, a few other states, even in states that lean red or are pretty red, the pro-abortion rights side has won. So that's something we'll be watching in Florida here. But for now, a 6-week ban in the state of Florida. Meanwhile, in Arizona, we got some other abortion news on Wednesday. That's where the Arizona State Senate has officially now repealed the state's 160-year-old abortion ban from the 1860s, before Arizona was even a state. We've told you about this. The state house passed it with all Democrats and 3 Republicans voting to repeal it. Over in the Senate, 2 Republicans joined the Democrats, but to win by a 1-vote margin. So now it goes to the Democratic governor, where almost assuredly will be signed. That now means that Arizona goes back to a 15-week ban, but Arizona is another state where in all likelihood they'll have a chance to vote on abortion rights this fall. And given how purple Arizona is, leaning blue, abortion rights advocates are hopeful that they'll be able to overturn that 15-week ban. So Jill, we're watching the state by state by state battle here when it comes to abortion rights and the politics of it, which so far, and this is something even Donald Trump has been saying, has not been great for Republicans nationally or at a local level. And that's one of the reasons why Trump was among those, even telling Arizona, like, whoa, the 1860s ban is too much for you guys, even as somebody who also appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade. So abortion here continues to be a big issue that will likely have a lot of impact this fall.
Time now for the speed read from CBS News. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was back in Israel Wednesday morning for his 7th visit to the country in nearly 7-month war. He says he is, quote, determined to see Hamas and Israel agree to a ceasefire in the conflict. He told Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, we are determined to achieve a ceasefire that will bring the abductees home, and to achieve it now. He says the only reason a deal will not be reached is because of Hamas. He says there's an offer on the table. And as we said, no delays, no excuses. So, Moshe, this is not the first time that Blinken has really put the onus of this on Hamas for there not being a deal. On Wednesday night, a spokesperson for Hamas, Osama Hamdan, said in an interview on Lebanese television, our position on the current negotiating paper is negative. Hamas's leaders adding that they would not accept the current Israeli proposals without changes, and that they are willing to keep negotiating. American officials believe that Israel has conceded everything it can, including lowering demands for the number of hostages returned, promising that the ceasefire could last several months, offering hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and more freedoms in Gaza. It's raising doubts in Washington about whether Hamas really wants a deal. Hamas, of course, believes there is one more concession Israel could give, which would be to announce an official end to the war. And that is something that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has told the U.S. that he cannot promise. He says they could do a lengthy ceasefire, but not a permanent one.
Yeah, hanging over all of this is Israel's threat to invade Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza. That's where there's 1 million civilians sheltering, but also where a majority of the remaining hostages are believed to be underground, and also where the remaining Hamas battalions are. The Israelis say that they've destroyed about 80% of Hamas, and the last remaining battalions are in the city of Rafah. But even as the Israelis vow to potentially carry out a ground invasion there, especially if Hamas keeps rejecting these deals, the world leaders, humanitarian groups, others are saying, Israel, you can't do this given that there's 1 million civilian sheltering there. You need a plan for them. The U.S. Still saying that the Israelis have to show them a plan that they feel okay about before the U.S. would give a green light for them to go into Rafah. So why the hold up here? So you've heard the Blinken view, you've heard the U.S. view that Israel's conceding as much as it can. On the Israeli side, we should mention there's Netanyahu, right, the prime minister. On one side of him, the international community, as well as the hostage families who are like, make more concessions, strike a deal here. He's saying he's done as much as he can because on the other side of him is his right-wing coalition partners who he has to thank for his political survival. It's a parliamentary system there, so he needs these coalition partners to keep a majority in the parliament, and they would ensure his downfall if he concedes even more to Hamas. In fact, they're already threatening to him that he's conceded too much to Hamas here. So he has his political survival at stake here. And so that's why the U.S. is like, Netanyahu is giving as much as he can here, Hamas. It's time for you to make a deal. Well, as far as Hamas is concerned, they think they have the advantage. And, this is really sadistic, but ultimately they believe that more death in Gaza, more civilian deaths, look worse for Israel. So allowing more civilians to die, the war to continue here, is actually good for the long term for Hamas because they see Israel losing international standing, losing international support. So as far as they're concerned, they have no reason to stop this. They have aid coming in. They have supplies. And so there's no urgency from the Hamas leadership, specifically Yahya Sinwar, their leader, who's living underground. Actually, U.S. intelligence believes he has at least 15 hostages surrounding him as sort of civilian shields to give up anything. So even though the Qataris are like, come on, Hamas. Egypt's like, come on, Hamas. U.S. is like, come on, Hamas. They don't feel the need to do anything, a real role reversal from 7 months ago where Hamas was sort of, screaming uncle and looking for that temporary ceasefire back in November. So that's where things stand. And it comes as the U.S. continues to tell Israel to keep increasing the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Right now, they've hit pre-war levels of humanitarian aid into Gaza. The U.S. is building that port for Gaza. So again, there is hope, especially for these hostage families, that they'll see their loved ones. But right now, it does not appear especially that at least one side is ready to make any concessions.
From the Associated Press, St. Louis's school district is offering to pay some families to drive their kids to school. It's part of an effort to offset a shortage of bus drivers. In a letter to parents, the district says, quote, "We are excited to announce a new set of programs aimed at addressing the current challenges in transportation services." I'm only giggling because it is such a PR spin on this.
It sounds exciting.
Under the plan, families who have experienced chronic bus absenteeism this year will receive gas cards for the next 2 weeks. So starting May 13th, all families in the district willing to transport their children can receive $75 for each of the last 2 weeks of school. And that money will be available to families whose students are not late or absent more than once a week. Yeah, so back in March, the Missouri Central School Bus Company announced it would terminate its contract with the district at the end of the school year. Apparently, there was a racist incident, and the relationship between the company and the district grew strained after a noose was found near the workstation of a black mechanic, and then there was an ensuing driver walkout. So this is specific to this particular district, but Jill, we've seen the school bus shortages across the country. We've been hearing on our Instagram feed from families across the country who say that there's less and less bus routes. The schools are having difficulty finding bus drivers. They've been increasing wages, but they still can't find drivers. And so this is an issue across the board here, and it looks like the folks in Missouri are trying to find a solution. To the economy from CBS News, Fed officials said Wednesday that they are leaving their interest rates unchanged for now, noting that progress in lowering U.S. inflation has stalled. The Fed on Wednesday saying it's keeping the federal funds rate in the range of 5.25% to 5.5%. That's the same level it's been held since the central bank's meeting last summer. It remains at the highest level in more than 20 years. Economists had largely expected the decision, given that inflation, as we reported here, had ticked upward in the first 3 months of 2024. Yeah, remember the Fed was increasing interest rates month after month after month to cool inflation, which was up at 9%. It came down to 3%. So the plan worked, but it's stubborn. Jobs remain strong. The economy's speeding along, spending remains strong, and with that, inflation is sort of stuck at this 3% level, and economists like to see it at a 2% level. So they're sort of in this place now where they don't need to raise interest rates, but they're not quite ready to lower interest rates and give a supercharge to the economy again, given that people are spending at current interest rates. So there was hope
that they could begin lowering interest rates by now. We told you about it in last year's podcast. But right now, higher housing costs, higher gas prices, especially going into the summer as they change into that summer blend, and there's some instability internationally, means that Fed's going to be staying put for a while here. There is hope that going into the fall, winter, that they might be able to begin lowering interest rates. But so far, nada.
Moshe, I'll spare everybody my rant on grocery prices not going down.
As we used to write in papers in college, IBID. You write IBID at the bottom when you have to quote the same source over and over again. There's some footnote trivia for you there, Jill.
We could just say, see podcast on April 3rd.
See podcast, see previous podcast.
From CNN, while Singapore and Doha's airports compete against each other for the title of world's best, another aviation hub is focusing on a different achievement. Japan's Kansai International Airport is marking 30 years without losing a single piece of luggage. In a press statement, Japan's seventh busiest airport said it had not lost any passenger bags since opening in September of 1994. So it isn't just that they've gone 30 years. It's since it opened, it has never lost
That's
a piece
an
of
incredible
luggage.
track record, Jill. I have to hand it to the folks at Kansai International. So, Jill, this airport averages 20 to 30 million passengers a year. That's the equivalent of Washington Reagan or Dulles here in the U.S. According to the latest rankings, Kansai was ranked 18th best airport in the world overall. But also on that list, you got Tokyo Narita and Haneda that are high up, 4th and 5th on that list. The Japanese are crushing it on the world's best airport list. The reason why Kansai, though, is 18th is that just timely baggage arrival is just one factor. There's also food and drink offerings, on-time arrivals, departures, cleanliness, a variety of other things. And just to give you a sense, so this airport has a perfect record, 20 to 30 million passengers a year. In the U.S., the 9 major airlines mishandle about 6 to 7 bags out of every 1,000 checked. So every 1,000 bags checked, 6 or 7 go missing or go to the wrong place.
Staying with the travel beat from Market Snacks, Venice, Italy, last week becoming what's believed to be the world's first city with an entrance fee for tourists. The floating city started to charge a $5 per person fee during peak travel season. That's late April to mid-July. Tourists trying to enter Venice have to register online and buy a QR code or face up to a $320 fine. In case you're wondering what this is all about, they're trying to counter over-tourism. Some residents say the fee, though, is turning Venice into a theme park. But this move is part of this growing effort by global tourist hotspots to protect historic sites. It turns out that day trippers, or people who just go there for the day, make up about 73% of visitors to Venice, but only about 18% of the city's $2 billion a year that they get in tourism. Hotel guests, therefore, are exempt from the fee. And Venice, by the way, not the only spot that's looking to control crowds.
Yeah, we've heard this story from Thailand. We've heard this story from Mykonos and Santorini. And now last week, a Japanese resort town has announced plans to build a barrier to dissuade tourists flocking there for Mount Fuji pictures.
Sounds like that's a selfie problem.
but Jill, we flock to these places for these beautiful Instagrammable photos and ultimately are destroying the environment in the process. And I think these cities are trying to all figure out different ways of dealing with it. Recently in Barcelona, a certain area was able to remove a bus route from Google and Apple Maps because tourists are taking over their bus route and the residents of that town can't use their bus anymore. So they literally got Google and Apple to take the bus route off the map so tourists aren't able to easily find it. In Greece, they've capped Acropolis onlookers at 20,000 people a day recently. U.S. national parks have also instituted daily caps. This summer, the Galapagos National Park will double its entrance fee to $200. So the takeaway here, if you're catching the drift, is that hotspots are reaching a melting point. And so as global sites test crowd countermeasures, tourism's still set to keep growing here. Jill, I don't know if the $5 fee is going to do much, especially in Venice, where it's $5 to hang out here for the day, unless you book a hotel room, which is obviously in the hundreds of dollars. So I imagine that'll go up over time. Global tourism expected to number 1.8 billion by the end of the decade, meaning 1 out of every 4 humans on Earth will be touring someplace annually by 2030. And so we all have to figure this out. We want to take in the beautiful sights around the world. And at the same time, we want to make sure we're not destroying it in the process.
And finally, from entertainment tonight, Moshe, we played the Justin Timberlake "It's Gonna Be May" meme on the podcast twice this week, but it appears that we have an explanation now for why he is pronouncing the word me as May. The meme, of course, stems from NSYNC's 2000 hit, "It's Gonna Be Me." When singing the main line in the song, Timberlake enunciates the word me as May. Timberlake telling the YouTube interview show Hot Ones that he was actually not the one who even came up with the idea to sing the line that way. He says it was actually about the producers. Take a listen.
Fact or fiction, the hook on "It's Gonna Be Me" has that May punctuation because Justin got a note from a producer that was, "Yeah, I need you to say it more like May, like a meaner me."
I don't remember if the specifics were a meaner me, but I sang "It's Gonna Be Me," and he was like, no. And he was like, "It's May.
Yeah.
May."
You also remember their Swedish accents.
Yeah,
And they had done a demo of it, and they were like, "It's like this."
They would put words away that almost didn't make sense, but when you sang them, they were more memorable.
So, Jill, it was the Swedes. It was the Swedish producers with their accent that were emphasizing May, not me.
I thought you were going to say, so basically he's saying, don't blame May. It's not.
That would have been good. That answer. Jill, we thought this was very important. I've already seen the comments on Instagram when I posted this clip that this is something that every millennial is going to store in their brain for a dinner party, because it's just like, it's a factoid that is like hyper relevant if you were born between the late 70s and the early 90s. And so anyway, he blames Max Martin, the Swedish producer. You know, this is something we've heard a lot from those late 90s hits, from the Spice Girls, Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. You know, when you actually listen to the lyrics, you're like, what are they talking about? That doesn't even make sense. And in many cases, you had these like rock star Swedish producers that were coming up with hit after hit after hit. And for them, it's about the sound. And of course, you know, it stood the test of time. So we give credit to the producers here. But sometimes it means that when you actually listen for meaning, there is none.
It's gonna be May. All right, my last one until 2025.
All right, mark it down, folks. Not the last grocery rant, but the last it's going to be May.
Never.
She won't make that promise. It's too early in the year. All right, let's get to On This Day in History. We're going to begin in 1803, 221 years ago today. The U.S. makes a huge purchase. In fact, Thomas Jefferson has to take out debt at that time to pay the French for the Louisiana Territory. The Louisiana Purchase, of course, stretches from Louisiana all the way to the Pacific West Coast. The U.S. pays a bargain, 3 cents per acre, for the nearly 1 million square miles that would soon prove to be a tremendous bargain, Jill.
3 cents an acre? I'll take it.
For the best farmland in the world. All right, fast forward to 1930. On this day, we are 5 months after the stock market crash. President Herbert Hoover gives a speech where he says the stock market crash is just a temporary setback. It's soon going to pass over. A temporary flash, this October crash. Well, for Herbert Hoover, this turned out to be the beginning of the Great Depression. He would lose re-election, FDR would become president, and the economy would worsen for 5 more years. All right, on this day in 1941, General Mills began shipping its newest cereal. They called it Cheery Oats. They were testing it in 6 markets. They would shorten it to, of course, Cheerios later. But another fun fact for you next time you're at breakfast, or I don't know, you're talking about cereal trivia, as one does.
Did you know the original name for Cheerios
was Cheery Oats? All right, we go to the year 2000 now. President Bill Clinton announces that this new thing called GPS was being made public. It was being degraded. It was being downgraded from military use to non-military use, of course, with developments in wireless. GPS is something we don't even question anymore. But on this day in the year 2000, we got access to it for the first time. And Jill, we should note GPS managed by the Space Force, which we've talked about on the podcast before. They've listened to us on the podcast, and we're talking to them about getting a behind-the-scenes tour over at Space Force, which will include how they manage GPS. All right, and we'll end here with a bit of movie history. Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery premiered in theaters 27 years ago on this day, May 2nd, 1997. I got a fun fact for you here too, Jill.
Lay it on me.
Mike Myers did not originally intend to also play Dr. Evil. He was only set to play Austin Powers. In fact, he thought Jim Carrey would have been a perfect Dr. Evil. In fact, it turns out Jim Carrey was interested in playing Dr. Evil, but at the time was shooting a film called Liar, Liar. You might remember Liar, Liar. And so that conflicted. And so that led Mike Myers to be like, you know what? I'll play both Austin Powers and Dr. Evil, according to Mike Myers. 30 to 40% of the dialogue in the movie improvised, partially because he's playing like half the characters.
Well, then I guess it turned out to be a good decision. But I do think Jim Carrey would have been good.
Jill, I'm sure it would have been iconic. That was sort of peak Jim Carrey at that moment. But now I can't really imagine Dr. Evil not also being played by Mike Myers.
The next time one of us takes a day off, Moshe, we'll do both parts of the podcast.
That's sort of what we already do. But no, you'll actually play. You're like, now I'm going to play the role of Moshe. Jill, that's interesting.
Jill.
Notably, I should add, yes, I know, everybody. Sometimes you send me messages. I know my catchphrases. That's very hard to lose all of them. Okay, I'm working on it.
And then, Moshe, you'll have to go on a grocery rant.
Can we talk about
the last time
on my last visit to Trader Joe's? I can only get 6 eggs. I can't even get a dozen eggs anymore.
All right, we are going to end it there. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Jill's playing the role, if you remember old 60 Minutes, Andy Rooney. Jill is our Andy Rooney. Do you know what annoys me lately? Grocery prices. The thing about Andy Rooney, though, Jill, was that he had a new rant every week at the end of 60 Minutes, and you just go back to the classics. So you really got to come up with more stuff to complain about.
I usually just save that for my husband, but I am happy to
that's a different podcast. That's a living podcast that walks around your home every day. Right. Your husband calls you Hurricane Jill, right? That's part of Hurricane Jill.
My husband will be like, please, if Moshe and the team want to hear you complain.
Yeah.
Yes, give it to the podcast.
Give it to the podcast crowd. By the way, we should mention, folks, we've rolled out our special promotions for the 1-year anniversary of Mo News Premium. You can get a special deal right now, 3 months free. Right now with the code STAYINFORMED, mo.news/premium. You support us, you get extra access, you get analysis, you get context. What are you waiting for? We've already had several hundred join with this promo offer just in the last 12 hours, Jill. So stay informed, one word, over at mo.news/premium. Join Premium, check it out. You won't regret it.
All right, bye, everyone.
Later.